Welcome to today's digital dialogue session with SAP and Oliver White. As you guys can see, today's session is all about business resilience powered by aligned and reliable processes. And we are lucky enough to be joined by Klaus and John from SAP and Mike from Oliver White. Klaus is business development for digital supply chain at SAP. John is VP of digital supply chain in Industry 4 for the EMEA region, and Mike is one of the managing associates over at Oliver White. As most of you are aware, the session today will be 60 minutes. It will be a combination of the online presentation delivered by the gentleman with us here today, with an interactive Q&A built in to the session. So at the bottom of your screens, you will see a Q&A chat room. Please feel free to post questions as we go. If you have questions, on the third or the fourth slide, don't wait until the end to ask them, because the guys will need to go right back to the beginning and answer them. So ask them as they come. I will be here live on the session throughout, so I'll prompt the speakers when they come in and we will address them as we go. Yeah, I'm sure the guys will do a brief introduction anyway, but I believe, Klaus, you'll lead the discussion from the SAP side, so over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you everybody for joining the call. We're looking forward to an engaging and interactive discussion today around business resilience, really, where we were talking about how processes, behaviors, and technology come together to power that aligned and reliable approach for running your company in a dynamic world. As mentioned by Dan, Mike Snape from Oliver White, John, myself from SAP, and we will take you through an agenda where we'll be talking a lot about disruptions, the disruptions that we deal with on a daily basis, but more so disruptions that are uncommon, that we don't have much experience in dealing with, and how we can prepare for such things, how preparedness is truly the underlying foundation for being able to deal with disruptions of the magnitudes that we all dread and that we all spend a lot of effort and power to come to terms with. So just a little background, John and myself from SAP. I want to start up by clearing up a common question that we're getting. What does SAP stand for? Well, systems, applications, and products in data processing. The last part, I've yet to come across anybody that knew that off the top of their head, but I've heard many abbreviations or examples of what SAP stands for. We've been around for quite a while, founded in 1972, and having about 100,000 employees globally, supporting more than 440,000 customers. That's another myth I just want to clear up straight away. About 80% of our customers are small and mid-sized enterprises. So we do, while we are a big company ourselves, we have a global coverage across all industries and sizes, and a lot of that is driven from what we are bringing to market. Initially, the whole ERP concept, and now very much about the intelligent enterprise concept. How do we infuse the intelligence that is all around us to really drive that integrated process end to end of your business? And that is what we are committed to support our customers in becoming best run business to achieve the best you can be. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Klaus. Good afternoon, everybody. As the slide says, I'm Mike from Oliver White. For those that don't know us, we were founded back in 1969 by Oliver White himself. And since then, we've been thought leaders in all things production planning, planning execution, sales and operations planning, demand, CPFR, integrated business planning. We're actually the originators of MRP2 and sales and operations planning. We work with across a lot of industries, from manufacturing through to process, chemical plants, coatings, paper plants. So there's not many business types we've not worked with. Our methodology is proven. We work to best practice processes, and these are well recognized around the globe, actually, from the clients that we work with, and they all want to sort of strive and achieve these best practices that we've developed over the last 51 years now.
Right. So why is SAP and Oliver White on this call together? There's a fairly simple explanation to it. We have started our official partnership, announced that earlier this year, really highlighting how we complement each other. Oliver White focusing and being a world leader in the whole concept of how do we drive the right processes to provide the foresight required to remain successful in business, tie that into what are the required people, skills, behaviors that we want to see in order to fulfill those processes. It's a lot about the whole maturation of organizations. How do we ensure that we stay at the forefront of everything that we do? And SAP comes in here where we're bringing tools to support this evolving process, the evolving behaviors of organizations, so people can focus on creating value, not focusing on gathering data, not focusing on analyzing data, but making decisions based on the data. We provide the foundation in that aspect that, or I should say, the third pillar that together with processes and people and behavior provide you with a stable platform for growth and for business resilience across industries and throughout the horizon of our business world today.
So before we get started, what would be good is, as we work through this, just to bear in mind some of these questions on here, because it helps then to put what we're going to go through into context. Now, unfortunately, we don't have to think too far back to think about the latest business disruption that has happened. But disruption happens more frequently than you think. There's always something happening there that we need to deal with, especially through the supply chain and around demand. We'll go into that in a bit more detail as we work through the slides. But yeah, before we start going, just have a think through, what happened. Not just the latest one, the ones before that, what happened, what did you do, how did you go around fixing it, did you actually get to the true root cause, or did you just stick a sticking plaster over that and carry on and wait till the next one comes along? Did you solve it? Who was involved in solving that? Did you learn anything from that disruption? Or did you just let it go and forgot about it, and then we'll start again when the next one comes along? And also, think about things like what were the financial costs, but also, your reputation, people, your market share, that sort of thing. And, importantly, if it were to happen again and you were faced with similar disruption or something that's going to come along and disrupt your business, what would you have done differently? So hindsight's wonderful. And these are all the sort of questions, we should be thinking about as we are faced with disruption, so we're better placed to deal with it next time it comes around. And some companies that, I've just pulled a couple out here actually that are well known. And some have been disruptive, and some have managed disruption, and they've managed some quite significant disruptive events better than others. And one of them, quite a famous study actually, was Fujifilm. They very quickly understood that digital photography was on its way in the 1980s and started to work on that, started to prepare by repositioning themselves, started to work on digital cameras, and actually using what their core competences and technical skills, managed to spread out and enter the pharmaceutical and cosmetics sector. And we all know what happened to Kodak. They sort of got left behind and very quickly went bust. And then we've got Aldi here in the UK, especially, came along quite aggressive, topped the rule book on how a traditional grocery store should run. Sold high quality products at low cost, and actually harmed all our traditional grocers here in the UK. Now, from an Aldi point of view, when the financial crash hit in 2008 and people's disposable income wasn't as much as it was, guess what? People started to flock to Aldi, and they didn't only harm the traditional grocers, they actually hammered them and took a lot of market share in the process. So there's a couple of stories about companies that have managed disruption, have understood disruption, have disrupted, and have also taken advantage of some disruption when it happens.
And what I find particularly fascinating about Aldi, Mike, is also how they managed to, even as we came out of the financial crash of 2008, have kept that market share that they gained.
Yeah.
So not just leaning back and resting on laurels.
Yeah, and what's
very,
also,
very fascinating.
What's also interesting, I think, is some of the bigger retailers have tried to somewhat model what they're doing and gone more down to value products.
Yeah.
But just not being as successful because I guess the stores are too big or the footprint's too big, and they're trying to fit their business model into this new type of business model that Aldi have come along with.
So that must tie back to, that's what you said about Fuji, take your know-how and really figure out how to use that in new sectors, new ways.
Yeah, rethink the business model.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've all seen this probably a million times now, the learning cycle, the learning model. And the learning model, as we know, is based on experience. You know, the more we experience something, the more we fail at it, the more we reflect on what we've done, the better we're going to get at it. Now, the problem is with some of these major disruptive events, they don't come along often enough to actually help us to learn. And even some of the more frequent ones, you know, but again, we don't seem to learn as quickly as we should because we need them. We need enough cycles really to start to learn and adapt to how we're going to deal with those. Now, as we move through this, when we start to accelerate our learning, we can start to rely on existing best practice that will give us the opportunity to really take a jump into and adapt some of the best practice processes in place that we can use to actually apply to the disruption that comes along, so we can actually deal with it quicker. Because, you know, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and I think having access to best practice processes and understanding how they work can move you on a lot quicker through these learning cycles.
Mike, it's John here. I just wanted to contribute a comment to that because I think we're a little bit unfair on people at times when we say they don't know, think about it. I think we've all been talking about disruption, digital disruption for quite a few years now. Everyone's aware of it. A lot of people are talking about it and they kind of know what they have to do. But it's, you know, we've talked about it in the past. It's not until you get burgled that actually 80% of people go and buy themselves a burglar alarm, because they're reacting to the event after it's occurred. They kind of know it can happen, but it's not happened to them, so they don't feel the pain. And then even in the smaller cases, you can learn incrementally, but the problem is that it's not that people don't learn from it, but it's sometimes, and this is going to play into what you're talking about later, I'm pretty sure, it's the alignment of the different areas and the prioritization of what it is you're learning, right? Because unless it's a catastrophic change of business model, of priorities or products that you're going to sell, which I think a lot of people are going to be seeing right now, and we'll come to later, you know, it's hard to get away from my day-to-day activity as a supply chain planner or a logistics execution professional my focus on what the job that I'm given is to keep improving and looking at my individual area. And whilst I could deal within the constraints of what I'm working with, that is not always aligned then with the strategic priorities. So it's not necessarily, I don't think that people don't learn. I think it's the whole entity and the organism or the organization and aligning those learnings and getting the investments where they're required to put in place something different to learn from what's gone before, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, John. So, as we were just discussing there, actually, you know, the more things happen, the more we can learn. And some of the more common things we get to deal with through the supply chain are the obvious ones, like demand changes, breakdowns, and supply delays. So we're quite used to them sort of disruptions in the supply chain. They're almost, in some instances, day after day disruptions that we're constantly working with. So we're quick to learn. You know, we have to develop good processes to manage that, and there are best practice processes in place to actually do just that. And we'll take a look at some of those as we go later on through this presentation. However, once in a while, we're faced with these things called a black swan event. Now, these black swans, it was a phrase actually coined from the financial sector back in the 80s, but it relates back to a really ancient story around where people actually only thought there were white swans because the swans had white feathers and nobody had ever seen a black swan before, so why would there be a black swan? Now that is until some intrepid Dutch explorers set sail and landed in Western Australia in 1697 and found some black swans. Hence, you know, history not actually being what it should have been. And the black swans did exist when everyone thought they didn't. So that's where the phrase comes from. And these black swans, you know, they're significant events, usually impactful across the globe. We're just not used to dealing with them because they're that big and that infrequent. And oftentimes we don't have any mitigation plans in place, and we're really not sure, you know, how to handle that. And that leads us into some of these behaviours that we see here. So when we're faced with significant disruption, we tend to, first of all, deny it, pretend it's not happening, ignore the data, ignore the signals and signs that are telling us these things are coming. We freeze. We sit there staring at our screen, wondering if it'll go away or not. And then we start to adopt some stereotypical behaviour as well, which means we revert back to what we know. So in a lot of cases, from a business point of view, we see companies trying to defend their existing business model within a changing market that's changing quite significantly, rather than thinking about, well, actually, you know, this business model doesn't fit no more. We need to readjust that and actually make it fit the new market conditions going forward. So, you know, we'll see companies spend a lot of money and resource actually, you know, defending what they've got rather than looking how to change and adapt to the market that's actually changed through one of these black swan events. And panic, you know, poor decisions lead to inappropriate actions. We have incomplete data. We don't have the right information. We feel like we just need to do something, and oftentimes we do end up making the wrong call if we're not careful. And the reason this happens really is we just don't have any processes to fall back on. So when something does happen we're not used to, we can't switch into an existing process, so we drop into these sort of behaviours in the absence of a good process to help us through a disruptive event. And interestingly, when you look at these black swan events, for me, the last the ones over the last 20 years. We've got the dot-com bubble in 2001, then the financial crash, Fukushima, Brexit. In amongst them also is the Twin Towers. We've got the current one, coronavirus. These were all seen as black swan events. So if you think about your business strategy, with it typically being a 5-year horizon, within that time frame of that strategy, you're going to be faced with at least one, if not two, of these major events that are going to cause some significant disruption somewhere along the way. So, it's important I think we recognise that, and we're prepared for it, and we have some processes in place to help us manage that when one of these things comes. We're not going to know what it is, we're not going to know what it looks like, but we know it's going to be significant and cause some significant disruption. Some of the ones that are already expected that you can see there, we've got the solar flares and geomagnetic storms, cyber threats, bioterrorism, and malevolent AI, so this is computers taking over the world. So these are what the experts are expecting. So we need to expect something's going to happen once we're through this current event, the coronavirus event. There will be something else comes along and causes disruption. Maybe not quite on the scale we're seeing on this one, but it will be disruptive.
I think that's the interesting thing about this, Mike. It's coming from so many different angles, but at the end of the day, as you point out here, it will impact demand and supply models. So the flexibility and agility to be able to adapt to that is as important for your day-to-day operation, but even more for your preparedness and resilience for these massive disruptive events.
And what's interesting as well, Klaus, just reading up around this sort of stuff, and the irony of it is, following on from some of these black swan events, in fact, following on from most of these black swan events, there is actually growth in the economy. We see a growth in the economy, which at the time it's all negative, doom and gloom, but at the end of it, there is always growth coming through.
It does tend to get people to work harder on getting good outcomes and solving the underlying issue, which is a positive thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But often we will hear that it's impossible to prepare for such events, and because they're so unpredictable and we don't know what they're going to be. But to your point, Mike, we see in this list that they happen on a regular basis, not, as you initially pointed out, on a daily or weekly, even monthly basis, but most of us would be able to fairly easy name 2 or 3 black swan events that have happened in our career, if not more. And Mike, you and I had a conversation about this yesterday where we fairly quickly got a long list together. So is it something you prepare for? And we will challenge the statement that you cannot prepare for these kind of black swan events. Just think about a couple of organizations that tend to do this exceedingly well. If you think about first responders, if you think about military units, even if you think about sports teams, they do this quite well. They have a few things in common. They have a clear organization and ownership structure, so they know who's supposed to do what and who's in charge when something happens. I'm thinking back when I was playing football as a little boy back in Denmark. We had a clear organization as to who was in defense, who was in the offense, and we would practice around that. And there was continuous training. I know we have a day-to-day job we have to do, and so we can't just do continuous training. But it shows that sort of training your organization or to develop the behaviors and the mindset that's required for resilience is very, very important to stay relative in the market. And then these skills need to also focus on the future. 2 great examples earlier, Mike, with Fuji and Aldi on organizations that really looked into the future and got ready for that. And probably very importantly, these teams are regularly faced with worst case scenarios. And that's something you can train. That's something they all train if we think about it. First responders, they will have these sort of, what happens if a train breaks down or train collides with another train in a tunnel? How do we deal with that? Military exercises, it's nothing but worst case scenarios. And back to the football team I was referring to earlier, we would often train that all of a sudden defense, we lost one man, he was put on the side, and then there were 5 attackers, and we had to learn to deal with that. So once we were faced with such situations in the match, we were prepared and we weren't falling back into the paralysis and sort of typical behaviors that Mike was talking about before. So is it possible to be prepared? Yes, it does require certain activities and a mindset to support this kind of preparedness. I just want to show another couple of examples of companies that have been well prepared for these kind of things. Lamb Weston, producing potatoes, supplying a lot of food service and retails across the world. By being able to quickly run different scenarios and see what would best help them to deliver the service that the customer required, they were able to provide the service levels that were most to regions that were most affected by the COVID-19 virus. So being able to quickly see what's the impact on demand and supply, my internal capacities, to be quickly able to shift around. That's where the whole sort of trinity we were talking about earlier of processes, behaviors, and technology come together to have the mindset, have the process of who does what, and the technology to enable quick scenario planning, understanding what happens throughout the network. Another one, Kemira, that's doing a lot of work around pulp and paper manufacturing in Finland. They were quickly able to go in and see which part of their supply chain has been impacted by China's sourced materials as that became very difficult to get into China. So, out of China, very quickly able to find out where can we get solutions in place, or how do we get solutions in place, where do we need to get solutions in place. And those are just examples of organizations that do not wear uniforms, that are also able to maintain, they build up and maintain a leading position within their industries.
Yeah,
Hi,
maybe
Klaus.
just
Sorry guys, it's Dan here from Industry IoT. Just wanted to prompt you that a question has come in from Mirko, who I believe is one of the supply chain leads at Pfizer. Not sure if one of you guys wanted to address that question. It's in the Q&A tab. If you just want to open that up at the bottom, you'll see it from Mirko there.
Yeah, hey Dan, just while we're on, can you just
Yes.
tell me, is the microphone any better right now?
Yeah, that sounds a little bit better. We did have someone else make a comment on that earlier. I'm not sure whether it's just the microphone. It sounds like the connection may be a little bit weak where you are. Klaus and Mike are fairly clear, but it did sound a little bit muffled for a moment where John spoke earlier. I'm not sure if you guys heard that as well.
Let me read out Mirko's question here.
Yes.
It's true that an unprecedented event such as Black Swan requires an unprecedented response. But in our case, sticking to the tried and tested in some key processes, for instance, escalation paths, helped us thrive during the COVID-19 crisis, as it mitigated any form of panic responses. What's your take on this?
Yes, Mirko. That's the sort of direction we're taking this. I think if you've got good processes and you understand how them processes work, and the processes, and we're actually going to talk about this a little bit later, and the processes are reliable and consistent with the right escalation paths, as you say there, then yes, you are going to be able to manage your way through these disruptive events. As we said, we don't know what shape they're going to take, we don't know what form they're going to take, so we can't prepare for everything, but just having that consistency of a good process that is tried and tested will help you, and it's probably why you're actually managing your way through it at the moment. And as you say there, it does reduce panic, because people know automatically what to do rather than have to think about it. Oh, thanks. I've just seen your other message there, Mirko. Thanks for that. No problem.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I mean, there's a couple of different modes here, right? There's the short-term reaction to visibility disruptions. Can I adjust quickly and not panic? And we've got a lot of customers, clients, people focusing around demand and demand sensing of immediate demand. So kind of make more of product X than product Y. And there, the whole environment about how you're able to respond quickly, this is almost what Mike was talking about before in the sort of day-to-day improvements in supply chain. I think that's absolutely vital, that the processes and the systems and the visibility is in place. Then there's a second scenario, which I consider to be a little bit more long-term, which is probably getting highlighted right now in the current environment that we've got, is whereby, okay, you've got the immediate panic demand spikes, and you've got trends in product demand, which are clearly very different right now, depending on your industry and your segment. But then there's also, you know, what's it going to look like when we come out of this? And will it just revert back to normal? You know, the war will be over by Christmas scenario, or is it going to be something different? And will we have a need, therefore, to actually be adjusting the business processes themselves or the business model itself? And then you come into more of a, you know, again, it's the planning mode again, almost, of planning for disruption, planning for change, and scenario planning, and looking at, well, if indefinitely all of these types of products are going to drop off because people are not going to travel for the next 2 years or whatever it might be, you know, how is that going to impact the business, and how do I completely adjust the whole business model to wrap around that? So there's two real scenarios, and just to finish off on the point, there's a lot of talk and a lot of move lately to, you know, doing good or better business models, or maybe sustainable objectives and goals out there in the marketplace. There's a potential that, you know, some of this get accelerated in the current environment, where people have seen the improvements in the climate. You know, we've got companies like Arla, very focused on near-term demand sensing, but also trying to set CO2 targets against the production of their product. And those types of things that kind of go longer term scenario planning are also something which is hugely interesting, I think, and requires the systems and processes in place. And hopefully that was clearer to hear than last time.
It was for me anyway, John.
It wasn't me.
That's
So,
why
yeah.
I've switched the video off. It's clearly helpful.
Yeah, so I think interestingly, I don't know if Mirko's seen our presentation.
I'll say it's a really good lead into the next slide. Yes, thank you for that one, Mirko.
All this was happening. So yeah, absolutely. How do we reduce the impact? So as we were just talking about regarding Mirko's question, you know, we don't know what form these things are going to come in, but we can take steps to actually help to mitigate the impact of them when they do happen. And there's a way of doing that. We call it hitting the sweet spot, which is in the middle of the three balls there that you can see in the center of the screen. Process, people and behaviors and tools. So when them three come together, that's the sweet spot. So when we get good processes, the right behaviors and the right tools that work properly, we can generally find our way through most things. In terms of processes then, you know, to the left, we've got our integrated business model there that consists of some strategic management through to integrated business planning, integrated tactical planning, and down into the lower level execution processes. These processes that sit in our integrated business model are all best practice proven processes that have been developed over the last 50 years. If run properly, then they will give you consistent output and results, so you know what you're going to get out of them processes. And they all have in place the required escalation processes to move any issues up through that through the organisation. So having the good processes in place helps to create the right behaviours and helps people out really. So when we do get into issues, it helps to reduce the panic, stops us freezing. We just run the process, see what the numbers say, understand the size of the problem, and we can work through dealing with that rather than spending countless hours and energy actually trying to understand where we are and what the size of the issue is and the potential impact on us is going to be. Because we'll have done all this before and run it through our processes and practiced it through one of our IBP sessions over there on the left. and then bringing that into the tool, Klaus.
Yeah, so that's really where the tool provides reads beyond what's just, on expression just, but the reads beyond what's within your four walls. It really allows us to go out and look what's going on with amongst our stakeholders, what's other sort of signals going on there. You can say get an early warning system in place to pick up on any kind of unforeseen or unexpected indicators and identify those early on before they're so big that it's clear to everybody. The earlier you can identify, the better it is. Based on that insight, we truly get into the possibility of having fast responses. And that's back to John's point about we need to do something with today, being able to quickly respond, understanding what's going on. To Mike's point about process, Marcus, you're about avoiding panic. Panic is the mother of all mess ups. I think it's a nice paraphrasing of that term. Really to ensure we can respond, understanding the impact of what we do, back to what Camara is doing, but also based on that, take a look at where we're going in the future. Again, tying into the process of looking 36 months out. Yes, the world is going to be a very different place. How do we operate in that marketplace when this Black Swan event is over? As things start settling back into new reality, what do we think that's going to be? And that's where the quick visualization, understanding of what's the impact across quantities, capacities, and financials is massively important. That
I think that's the key, isn't it, Klaus?
Yeah.
You know, for me, it's access to data and access to data quickly, and access to data quickly that's reliable, that you can trust.
Absolutely.
That's why all them three things need to be spot on and in place.
Definitely.
Help you understand where you are and deal with these things.
Yes. And that's where the sort of platform comes in. Rather than looking at it as I have a supply chain platform or I have an ERP system, we need to broaden it and say, I need to look to the outside world. What's going on with my markets? How's my brand doing? How's my suppliers, customers? All sorts of regulatory bodies going on and various other signs out there. We need to sort of have a way of gathering this experience data, if you will, market data, to collate this, categorize it, and put a probability to it. And so we're aware of it, and we can then use that in our risk simulations that is overlain on our operational data, what's coming out of our enterprise end-to-end coverage, if you will, creating a digital twin of your business, and thereby overlaying what's going on in the world, what do we expect is going to happen in the world, and what is this worst case scenario you can think of in the world. Developing scenarios or strategies on how to deal with those to a varying degree of spot on, but just being aware of what do I do in a massive supply disruption, what do I do in massive demand disruption, what do I do in a massive financial disruption. These kind of things are at high level scenarios we can think of, and then do various iterations depending on how complex they are through this digital twin, come up with various approaches that can work, and then once they strike, we don't have to start deciding what do we do now, what's even the impact. We are prepared and we can start execute on those scenarios. And these kind of events do have real life impacts. And we came across an interesting analysis of the top 100 fastest growing categories and top fastest declining categories. And it's interesting to see that some of these companies could probably be in a much better place if they had that foresight and that insight. Found it fascinating to see that amongst the fastest growing categories in the world, we have bread machines. Explains why it's hard to get yeast and flour in stores these days.
Oh, that's close. That is a funny one for me.
It is. That's the second fastest growing category.
And there's no flour to put in them now. So.
Exactly. Weight training equipment might go hand in hand with the bread machine. It would be interesting to see if there's a lag from when I got my bread machine to when I buy my weight training. Yeah. As well as craft kits and projects. These are things that I don't think many of us would have thought much about. On the other side, what are the fastest declining categories? Cameras I personally don't think that has anything to do with this Black Swan event. That's just, smartphones. So are Black Swan events the only massive influences, or do we have to see digital or technological development as also potential massive disruptors? My personal view is yes, we do. Smartphones do really, really good pictures, and the need for a SLR camera declines if I'm not a professional photographer. Event and party supplies kind of make sense, as well as camping equipment, whether that's because people are getting more comfortable or bed and breakfast opportunities become an option, or if it's truly because we are starting to travel less. Those are kind of things where technology can help you identify initial drivers, early on identify what are some of those small indicators of change, and allowing you to set up a task force or teams dedicated to analyze what's the driver, what's the impact, and what can we do about it if this is the business you're in.
And I think, and building on that as well, for me, that's the now. So how has this current crisis, if you like, impacted the future? So what's that going to look like in 5 years from now?
Yeah.
Are people going to go, well, you know what, I quite like making my own bread, so the bread sales are going to stay high, or I quite like doing the weight training in my own house, or the gym's going to suffer. We don't know, but these are the things we need to figure out and adapt to as we move out of this current one.
Just to add one more thing on there. I mean, again, this is very much now in the midst of it. I think as we've all said, it would be too simple to say, oh, well, the demand will normalize after this event has occurred. The big question is really, can we simulate and be ready for a specific change that might come on the other side of this thing? And organizationally, and it's not just even process, it's also your infrastructure and your supply base and so on. Can you plan for, okay, what if, and I'll use the example again, what if the sustainability trend that was happening before is suddenly accelerated now into the future? So this is all theoretical and great. I think going back again early in your presentation, what I can see now is a difference in the way people are reacting. Some people are very much in the here and the now and the panic, and let's just assume it comes back again. And then there's a few now starting to think about, well, I'm going to be having a bad year or so anyway. Why don't we use this to make sure that we are tooled and ready for the next wave? Even if we can't predict it 100%, at least we can make our processes and our solution and our supply chain infrastructure agile enough to meet whatever that might be on the other side of it.
Very good point, John.
Yeah, so, when we're faced with these disruptions, we've got, as we've just been speaking about, actually, we've got two things to think about. We've got the now and the short term. So how do we get through the next few months, 3 months, 4 months, however long this is going to run for? And then what happens further out? How has this changed future market conditions? A lot of places, a lot of businesses fall into the trap of actually trying to solve this through the IBP process, through the integrated business planning process. And really that process is set there for the midterm, not for managing the short term. And we'll talk about that in a few slides time. But in the short term, right up until where your cumulative lead time ends, we call it the focus month, where we set the planning time fence. We have a process called integrated tactical planning, which is a weekly review of where we are. So it's looking at the demand changes, the supply impacts that we're seeing, how we're going to bring them two together and manage our way through this process. It's a week by week process that's actually happening all the time. It's running at a level between like the planning teams and the demand planning teams, so we actually know where we are, and that's getting reported back up to the exec team, so they know exactly what's happening as we work our way through this this crisis. And part of part of this process really is understanding what your priorities are. So what is right for the business. So we have this in mind before we are hit with a disruption, because we've sat and thought it through as we've built our processes up. So we know what's right for the business, we know what's right for our customers, and we know who our key customers are and the ones that we're going to keep supplying and the ones that we can afford to let go if we need to. And then following on from that, we understand how that's going to fit around functions and individuals. But it's absolutely important that we understand what the business priorities are. And when we're thinking through them priorities, we're looking at the model to the right there, the Venn diagram, which has got the stability of the planned costs and responsiveness to market needs. And again, we're trying to hit the sweet spot there. So we want to hold the plan as stable as we can, given the circumstances, because we all know changing and moving plans around in the short term is very costly, which impacts our profits. But then at the same time, we need to understand the market needs. So we need to balance all those three things there. So we're hitting the sweet spot with the priorities based on what's best for our business.
And ways of doing that, or a foundational part of that, is to be able to understand what's going on in the market. What are the requirements? To Mike's point, best for customer. Well, I need to know my customer. I need to understand what's going on, what the product impact is. Also, in a black swan event, there can be decisions that need to be made that's potentially not financially the best decision, but because of specific demand in the market, I need to make suboptimal decisions there. So understand that view of what is required to be successful and perceived successful in the market, and is a foundation for where we're going. Continuously aligning across business areas is just pivotal, and that is both internally and externally. Ensure that I work with my suppliers, I work with my key customers, I work with any third-party business partners I have that I need to be aligned with. So we are aware of abilities and constraints now, tomorrow, next month, and in the long run. Only then can we truly start talking about having a plan in place, a plan that's executionable. And I think that is one of the very important parts as well, is the plan needs to be executionable. In order for that to happen, it needs to be informed about what's going on in the real world, both the outside world, so the customer and product view, but also internally. What are my capabilities? Am I limited due to workforce shortage? Am I limited in my production capacity due to shut down certain parts of my production facilities? Those kind of things need to be taken into place in order to make sure the plan is viable. Also, for looking ahead, being aware of, yes, I might have a nominal production capacity of X, but reality shows I'm never going to get across 80%. Those are the kind of things that I need to know when I build my plan, and only then can I start talking about an executable plan, and I can start having visibility on how does the plan unfold and respond to those changes that inevitably are going to happen throughout the execution of the plan. That sort of integrated process, integrated platform across various planning horizons, educating back and forth from executional up to strategy and back down through tactical and executional and across functions, takes a lot of the discussion about numbers out of the game. We're all working from one set of numbers. We can agree on what are our different roles and responsibilities and execution of that plan, keeping in mind what you're talking about, Mike. What's best for the business? What's best for the customers? What's best for the functions?
And it's about, it's about where do you spend your time, isn't it? If you've got the good processes in place and a system that works properly, you don't have to go hunting around in there to extract the data that you need to make the right decisions. The data's in there, and it tells you where to go and look, and that saves time, saves energy, and allows you to concentrate on building the right scenarios, testing them out, and actually making the right decisions for the business.
Absolutely increases the impact of people's time spent.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, the ultimate goal of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we talked a few slides earlier. You know, what about the future? So, what's the world going to look like as we start to emerge out of this current crisis? You know, and that's where our IBP process can really start to help us. We can then start to look at and think about the assumptions out over the next 2 to 3 years in terms of, well, what do we think and what do we believe the market to look like, and build those assumptions into our demand plans and our supply plans, so we can start to see how far the gap is now things have changed from our actual strategy that was set in place. And if the gap's significant, it may be that we need to change our strategy. You know, so it will spark a response there from a strategic review if the gap's significant and we cannot find any closure to those gaps. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes things change and we need to review it. Why carry on trying to run to a strategy that was put in place prior to the current crisis when we're not a chance in actually achieving it? You know, so let's have a look at where we are, understand what the new conditions are going to look like, and let's review our strategy and get going again.
I think that is that's also one, right? It's the courage to let go of the status quo, yeah, which for many people, myself included, in many situations, can be a frightening thing to do. And if we look at some of those typical behaviors we were talking about before, Mike, might explain some of the drive we see there.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, isn't it? Because you got to also, when you dig into those behaviors, you have got that emotional attachment to your current strategy, if you like. You know, so it is hard to let go, and having a good process, allowing you to have the visibility of what the future is going to look like as best you can get it through thinking through the assumptions.
Yeah.
Challenge that current strategy you've got in place. It's going to give you the confidence to, you know, let it go and rework it into something that's going to help drive the business forward through the new world.
Definitely.
So we're getting towards the end now. So in summary, really, you know, disruption happens. Sometimes it's significant, as we are all too aware at the moment. Most of the time, it's just irritating, but it does happen, and we need to make sure we've got good processes in place to deal with it. And there are processes there that are set up to help you deal with disruptions when they occur, and actually to build scenario plans around that and actually practice managing your way out of these things. You know, so you can run some scenarios and do some what ifs and actually run your teams through some of the planning processes around what happens if we get something that's going to cause some disruption. So it might not be as big as the current one, but we may have some supply disruptions. We may have some smaller demand disruptions. We want to run some scenarios across. Main thing, you know, be clear on the impact and on your priorities. Not all disruption is bad. There's always opportunities in there. So that's one thing I always have in mind. You know, although at the time it seems bad, there are always opportunities coming out the other end. And the future, you know, it's going to look different. So let's not get engrossed in the current. And we need to think out into the future and understand how that's going to look for us. So it's important, while we're in the midst of sorting it out, that we actually don't lose sight of what the future may well look like, and that we're prepared for that.
I think, Mike, that's back to the whole point about not all disruption is bad. You were pointing out or mentioning earlier that the studies show that after every major disruption, there's actually been economical growth, and I think we'd also say there's been a technological growth after most major disruptions in the last 100 years. If we look at what the world looked like before World War II compared to what it looks like after, where all of a sudden 10 years after the war, most people had access to refrigerators and televisions through some of the innovations that were driven. Exactly. So to your point, to John's point, yes, be ready to deal with the situation as it is today, but also, and that's probably going to be the hard part, divert some resources or reserve some resources to look at what's that future going to be, that you're ready to look at that.
I think just one closing comment on that is, you know, the important thing is it's easier to do that. It's easier to think strategically and have everyone aligned and be able to adjust if they've got access to the information and the data and it's not all separated. So the process is key. The systems are great, but systems are great without a good process and people looking at the data or looking at them independently. It's completely pointless, because what a supply planner cares about is not always the same as what demand or what finance or whoever else is thinking about. So, you know, pretty clear that it is, and this is the key message, it's the alignment of all three, a visibility that supports the decisions and takes away that panic and ambiguity about what is coming and how should we adapt and get ready for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it. We've got about 5 minutes left, so if anybody does have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Hi guys, Dan here from Industry IoT. Thank you very much for delivering the presentation this afternoon. It was great. As we've come to the end of the session, is there any direct questions for Mike, Klaus or John while we have them here live? Please fire away in the Q&A chat room at the bottom of the screen. Alternatively, Industry IoT has a community platform where we can take the webinar that's been recorded and we'll upload it into the platform. And if anyone has any more questions about it and would like to discuss parts of the presentation further, then you can do that via the platform. Either myself or one of my colleagues will reach out to you with a little bit more information about how you can do that. But of course, if there are any questions now while we're live, then please fire away. Okay, well, we've probably got 1 or 2 minutes, I think, before we get cut off anyway. So what we'll do, we'll put the session into the community platform. Obviously, I'm connected with Mike, Klaus and John personally, so I can facilitate any introductions or be able to help with any questions or comments following the session. But as I said, myself and my colleagues will follow up after the session with more information on how you guys can continue the discussion via our platform. And hopefully there'll be some more questions to come after we do that. But if there are no more right now, then we'll bring it to a close. Once again, thank you, Mike, Klaus and John, for your time this afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. It was great, very insightful. And I think we have, okay. I will ask offline. Sophia said she does have a question, but she will ask offline. And thank you very much for the presentation. All right, fine. We'll bring it to a close then, guys. Thank you very much for your time and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.